Daily life in 1700s Boston unfolded at a pace shaped by sunrise and sunset, church bells, seasons, and the steady rhythm of labor that left little room for idleness. The city was compact, crowded, and intensely alive, with narrow dirt streets winding between wooden houses, brick shops, warehouses, taverns, and wharves that reached into a busy harbor. From early morning, the air carried a mixture of smells: salt from the sea, smoke from hearth fires, horse manure, fish, leather, ale, and the sharp tang of tanned hides. Boston was one of the most important towns in colonial America, yet it was still small by modern standards, home to roughly 7,000 people at the start of the century, and about 16,000 by mid-century, meaning nearly everyone lived within walking distance of work, worship, and trade. Most days began before dawn. Families rose early, especially in winter when daylight was precious and candles expensive. Homes were cold, even indoors, and people dressed quickly in layers of wool and linen. A typical house consisted of a main room that served as kitchen, dining space, and living area, with a large fireplace at its center. The hearth was the heart of the home, used for cooking, warmth, and light. Breakfast was simple and filling: porridge made from cornmeal or oats, bread left from the previous day, milk when available, and occasionally salted fish or leftover meat. Tea and coffee were known but expensive imports, so beer, cider, or small beer with low alcohol content was commonly consumed even in the morning, as water could be unsafe. Work dominated daily life, and almost everyone worked in some form, including children. Men might be artisans, shipbuilders, coopers, blacksmiths, printers, carpenters, or merchants. Boston's economy was closely tied to the sea, so sailors, dock workers, rope makers, sail makers, and channelers were common sights. Ships arrived constantly from England, the Caribbean, Africa, and other colonies, unloading sugar, molasses, rum, cloth, tools, books, and news from abroad. In return, Boston exported fish, timber, barrels, livestock, and manufactured goods. The waterfront was the loudest part of the city, filled with shouting sailors, creaking masts, flapping sails, and the clatter of carts hauling goods through muddy streets. Women's work was just as essential, though often confined to home or small-scale trade. Most women spent their days cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, spinning yarn, making candles, preserving food, and caring for children. Many also contributed to the household income by taking in boarders, selling baked goods, sewing, laundering clothes, or running small shops. Widows frequently inherited their husbands' businesses and continued to operate them, from taverns to print shops. In poorer households, women and girls worked as servants in wealthier homes, rising before their employers and laboring until late at night for modest wages, food, and shelter. Children grew up fast in 1700s Boston. Childhood was not seen as a long, protected stage of life, but as preparation for adult responsibility. By the age of 5 or 6, children were expected to help with chores, carrying water, gathering firewood, minding younger siblings, or assisting in family businesses. Boys from artisan families often became apprentices in their early teens, binding themselves to a master for several years in exchange for training, room, and board. Girls learned household skills from their mothers and might be sent to work as servants or helpers in other homes. Formal schooling existed, especially for boys, and Boston was proud of its schools. But education focused heavily on reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious instruction rather than creativity or play. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of life. Boston had been founded by Puritans, and although religious attitudes softened somewhat over the century, church attendance remained central. Sundays were strictly observed, shops closed, work stopped, and families walked to meeting houses, often sitting through sermons that lasted 2 hours or more. Churches were cold in winter and stifling in summer, yet attendance was expected, and absences were noticed. Ministers held enormous influence, offering not only spiritual guidance but moral judgment on the behavior of the community. Public shaming, fines, and church discipline were common tools used to enforce social norms. Social life revolved around family, church, and community gatherings rather than leisure in the modern sense. Taverns were important social hubs where men discussed politics, business, and news while drinking ale or rum. These spaces also hosted meetings, auctions, and even court sessions. Women socialized during chores, visiting neighbors while spinning or sewing together. Public events such as market days, militia drills, funerals, and executions drew large crowds. Executions were considered moral lessons and attracted spectators of all ages, reflecting a harsher attitude toward death and punishment than exists today. Food in 1700s, Boston was plain but hearty, designed to fuel hard labor. Diets depended heavily on bread, corn, beans, and salted meat or fish. Fresh meat was rare outside of slaughter season, so pork and beef were often preserved with salt. Vegetables like turnips, cabbage, onions, and squash were common, while fruits were eaten fresh in season or dried for winter. Spices existed but were expensive, so meals were not heavily seasoned. Wealthier households enjoyed more variety, including imported sugar, tea, coffee, chocolate, and wine, which became symbols of status and refinement. Clothing was functional, durable, and expensive, so people owned few garments and cared for them carefully. Most clothing was made at home or by local tailors using wool or linen. Colors tended to be muted, though wealthier Bostonians wore brighter dyes and finer fabrics imported from England. Men wore breeches, waistcoats, shirts, stockings, and coats, while women wore shifts, stays, petticoats, and gowns. Children were dressed like miniature adults. Washing clothes was labor-intensive and done infrequently, contributing to the constant smell of smoke, sweat, and animals that defined the city. Health and medicine were uncertain and often frightening. Doctors existed but were few, and medical knowledge was limited. Treatments included bleeding, purging, herbal remedies, and prayer. Epidemics of smallpox, influenza, and other diseases swept through Boston regularly, killing hundreds. Smallpox was especially feared, and debates over inoculation caused deep divisions in the community. Life expectancy was low by modern standards, though many who survived childhood lived into their 50s or 60s. Death was a familiar presence, and mourning rituals were public and solemn, with funerals serving as major social events. Boston's streets were busy but chaotic. There were no sidewalks, streetlights were minimal, and sanitation was poor. Trash and waste were often thrown into the street or harbor. Animals roamed freely, including pigs, chickens, and goats. Carts and horses shared space with pedestrians, and accidents were common. Fires were a constant threat due to wooden buildings and open flames, so citizens were required to keep buckets ready and respond to alarms. Nighttime brought darkness, broken only by moonlight and lanterns, and most people stayed indoors after sunset unless necessary. By mid-century, political tension increasingly crept into daily conversations. Taxes, trade restrictions, and British authority became frequent topics in taverns and meeting houses. Newspapers and pamphlets circulated widely, read aloud in public spaces for those who could not read. Ordinary Bostonians became deeply engaged in political debate, and daily life slowly took on an edge of uncertainty and resistance. Yet even as revolutionary ideas grew, daily routines of work, worship, and family life continued much as they always had. Life in 1700s, Boston was demanding, intimate, and deeply communal. Privacy was rare, comfort limited, and survival depended on cooperation, discipline, and hard work. People lived close to one another, physically and socially, bound by shared labor, shared beliefs, and shared risks. While the world they inhabited lacked modern conveniences, it was rich in human connection, routine, and resilience. Every day was shaped by necessity, faith, and the ever-present awareness that life was fragile. Time was precious, and community was essential.